What up, friendos? Welcome back. I thought a couple days ago I was going to prove the internet wrong, right? Because everyone was saying Concord costs Sony hundreds of millions of dollars and it's a terrible game. And I thought, if these people played it, because almost nobody has, are they using this as like a way to just laugh at big company failing and the game's actually okay and there's just things around it that have made it fail? And obviously that would have been a good video. But unfortunately, I can't tell you that you were wrong, at least most of you. If you were somebody who felt like this game failed because of current social or political or whatever messaging, you were definitely wrong. But everyone who just said the game's not very good, you were completely right. So we're going to use this video instead to go over not only my thoughts and feelings after having actually played the game, and thankfully getting a refund for it after, because it's not a good one, but also to go through the current, I guess, meltdown of some mainstream game journalists and publications about basically this being other people's fault that the game is not popular and maybe people not giving it a fair shake or whatever else, however else they're going to put it. As well as, of course, that the numbers are even worse now. And one of the developers for the game went completely unhinged on social media because people were criticizing the thing that they worked on. So let's start off with, obviously, player numbers. Now, the reason that this is interesting is because this game did cost, allegedly, north of $50 million, but some people are claiming it's going to cost them over $200 million all told. What you've got to think about things like this is, this was being developed for 8 years. And in a way, when you're actually playing it, when you've put the time and effort in to go and subject yourself to this video game, you do sort of question where did that money go and where did that time go. But then there's a weird sort of thing going on with Concord where the parts of the game that doesn't need attention and time and money, it seems like all of it's gone there. And then the parts that do need time, attention, and money are just kind of mediocre or worse than mediocre compared to its competitors, basically. But we'll get more into the nitty gritty and exactly what's wrong with the game and why it's failed in a second. First, we got to look at the numbers, right? It launched to one of the worst AAA populations of a video game I've ever seen. This is frankly embarrassing. They probably really wish that they could hide player numbers on Steam. Because, what can you say? 697 peak. I'm fairly sure on my Twitch streams, which I do probably once every year or so, have had a higher peak player count than this video game. And my Twitch streams definitely haven't cost $50 to $200 million or being promoted by one of the biggest gaming companies on the planet. It's frankly embarrassing. We all know this. It's been everywhere. But what's even more embarrassing is just this drop off, because there's a way to look at this as it's failed for now, but maybe if some of the narrative, some of the things surrounding the game that definitely contributed to it failing were rectified, maybe it could come back, right? But this is kind of evidence that it can't come back, because what happens with live service games and a lot of games that basically require a population of players is that it's a snowball rolling downhill, and that works as a metaphor because the snowball rolls down and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger as it goes, and eventually you're not stopping the snowball. It's just going to get huge and then it's going to crash into something. What you have with live service games is that snowball is the player population decline, because you require people to play, and the faster people leave the game and aren't playing, the faster it makes other people quit because they have longer queue times. The matches are worse quality because it's broadening the parameters of hidden MMR and stuff to put you in games with people that are either vastly worse than you, vastly better than you, and in general it just makes games imbalanced, unfun, and take longer to get into, which is another aspect of this game we'll have to go over in a minute. Because when I played a couple days ago, the population was a couple hundred in the evening. Now it's going to be less than a couple hundred in the evening. But of course, this game is crossplay. So there is that saving grace, I guess, because I think the game's more popular on PlayStation than it has been on Steam. Maybe because there's less competition, maybe because it plays better on controller, or, you know, whatever the reason's going to be. Basically, PC people have abandoned this game, they've abandoned ship, and it seems like they've continued to. Now, when I talked about earlier, you know, one of the problems that plagues this game, and one of the things that would have prevented it from seeing big success in the first place, being removed, perhaps it could have, you know, saw a population growth. Well, that's obviously the box price, right? That's the elephant in the room with games like this. Basically, they've spent 8 years developing something and wanted to either make it a premium experience to avoid a cash shop, or, you know, to claw back some of that investment. Whoever made this decision, they sold the game for $40 US. I believe it's £35, so it must be $40 US. And obviously, when you look at its competition, not even looking at things like Deadlock, which obviously is basically playable now, pretty much anybody can get in, and would not be a direct competitor, but I feel like if you're playing a hero shooter, you're probably going to try that, and then when you do, you're probably going to understand how sluggish and slow and lackluster this game is. But pretty much anything like Overwatch, other hero shooters, there's not that many, because it's kind of a very difficult genre to gain a foothold with player base and have people continue playing, for the things that plague games like this, like visual issues in terms of like readability and balance and things like that. They're something you have to constantly be on top of, as well as keeping it fun. And it just long term isn't an easy thing to do. That's why we've not seen, you know, games come out in this genre and really stick. Overwatch being one of the big ones that has, of course, but also for very different reasons. Because obviously it's Blizzard, and people love Blizzard IP and would play it regardless. There are things that draw from the pool of sort of hero shooters. Of course, Valorant's going to be one, Deadlock's going to be one, Overwatch, of course, dominates that genre. But others that came earlier than this failed, and what they've all got in common is that they're free to play. So you've got premium products there that already have an audience, that already have tons of content, that have a track record, that have big developers, and then you have a newcomer here that said, oh, come and play our game, but it's going to cost you $40 up front. And that's a non-starter for most people, because it's just kind of like, it's obvious. Why would you pay for this? It's going to go free to play or die. It's one of those two things. So if it does die, your money's gone nowhere, right? You might get some enjoyment out of it, but how much if there's no player base? You just have to wait a week and see. And within the first day we saw, basically. And then, of course, if it does go free to play, you can just try it then. And if it does get money pumped into it, that's exactly where this game's going. So the box price is, again, a non-starter. But the thing is that none of those things really matter to Concord, because as an actual game, it's just confusing. It's messy, it's muddy, it's beyond mediocre, I guess, in many ways. It's just not a good game. Like, obviously, a lot of people have done the culture war stuff with this game, because there's a bunch of characters that are, you know, unattractive women, large women, you know, there's not a lot of white men in there. And they've said, you know, the typical go woke, go broke, and the game failed because of diversity and whatever else. That's just lazy. It's a lazy narrative. It always is. Good games are good and they do well. Bad games are bad and they don't do well. This is just a bad game. It's nothing to do with the characters. Like, some of the characters are pretty cool. It's a hero shooter. You know, you're not creating. You're not. It's not an RPG. You're not stuck playing these characters. You're swapping in and out. It's a competitive type of game. That shit just doesn't really matter, and I don't think it would have had any kind of impact on the sales. Maybe a little bit, but you'll tend to notice that boycotts matter not. And if you truly sincerely believe that this like woke, anti-woke thing that's going on the internet right now is like a big movement and it has a drastic impact on the market, I'd suggest just leaving the bubble that you're in, because just factually, realistically, objectively, the vast majority of consumers have no clue these conversations are even happening. The vast majority of gamers come home from work to their wife and kids, they open up a video game store, they see a new game, they click and they play it. Maybe they'll read some reviews on the main page, but they're not engaging with social media in that way. These narratives are like things that exist in the bubbles of the internet that we operate on, like in YouTube gaming and on Twitter and some Discord servers. It's not something that's really impacting the market at large. People just see games and they play them if they look cool, and that's kind of how the vast majority of gamers actually interact with the medium. And it's the same thing with movies and TV shows, things of that nature. We've seen massive boycotts fail in gaming repeatedly on both sides. Even when both sides are trying to boycott something, it just doesn't work. The reason that this game failed is that it's mediocre or below in all the things that matter for the type of game it's trying to be, for the type of audience it's trying to cultivate. But then it's above average in areas that don't matter to that audience. For instance, and I'll give you some examples here because, like I say, I did try playing the game. Unfortunately, lost my recording footage because apparently if you record on OBS and stream on Discord at the same time, it just records the audio and then freezes all the video on OBS, and I didn't know that, so I don't have any footage. So bear with me on this, it's just going to be me talking. Basically, the best thing about Concord is that there's like actual mocapped amazing animations and cinematics and things like that for the game, but it's not a single player game or a story game or something that has characters people care about yet. And this is kind of where the studio shows their lack of knowledge or immaturity or naivety, whatever way we want to put it, or their optimism, or you could even say arrogance. Because this is kind of like when a big company like Blizzard have traditionally done come in and say, we're going to make an esport. This game's going to be an esport, neglecting the fact that pretty much all esports that have succeeded over the past 20 years have done so because they were built from the love of the game, by the community, for the community, not manufactured in a lab, not manufactured for a test group. By and large, obviously, Riot have done it a little bit recently with Valorant, but they kind of just have the code cracked because they have so many people who love the Riot way and the Riot IP, things like that. Blizzard tried it with Overwatch, and it failed tremendously. They pumped money into it, hundreds of millions of dollars, and it was a tremendous, spectacular failure. Many other companies have done the same, and in that same way, Concord arrogantly thought that they would curate an audience who loved these characters and cared about cinematics, and made cinematics and made this like a big focal point of the characters in the game. And obviously a bunch of time and money and effort and emphasis went into that. But just realistically, nobody knows the characters, nobody cares about the characters. It just is what it is. People coming to this game, maybe if the game was really good and the characters were really compelling, maybe they could have got into that aspect, but they weren't there yet. So focusing on that as like an out of the gate thing, it's cool, but then you get into the actual gameplay and it just doesn't matter. And it just seems like their focus was in really the wrong place in this, because what this game does well, I'll go over that first. Obviously those cinematics are great, but they're irrelevant. The sound design is really good, which actually does matter for the gameplay, because you can hear people running around and things. That's great. The music's good. The actual gun sounds and animations and everything, the animations in general are great. The graphics are good, but the maps and the color palette of the actual backgrounds and playing the game is just very muddy. It's very grey. It's very dull. But the actual colors of the characters and certain abilities and stuff look good. The problem obviously comes in later on that the shooting just kind of doesn't feel great the majority of the time. A lot of the characters have like splash abilities. It seems like a couple of the characters are just really imbalanced good. They just have way better guns than everybody else. The maps are not designed great. The maps are pretty piss poor actually. And just in general, the movement doesn't feel good outside of a couple of characters. It feels like it's kind of in that middle ground of not being realistic, not being like fun, run around crazy arcadey. It's just somewhere in the middle and split between both in certain areas where it would have been better leaning into one or the other and being either wacky and crazy or being very realistic in terms of like the movement speed and feel and things like that. It feels like the shooting is like a secondary component, but then the movement is trying to be very, I guess, rigid, and it doesn't feel good, in my opinion, on a PC, especially when stuff like the dodge is like a third-person switch animation lock thing, which doesn't feel great at all. Just in general, I didn't really jive with many of the characters. I didn't think they were well designed in terms of their kits or anything, and I didn't find any of them, bar one or two, actually even remotely playably fun. and this is coming from somebody who's been playing a lot of, Deadlock recently, and think pretty much all of those characters have something going for them that makes me be like, oh, I could play this for, hundreds of games and probably find nuances and fun in that. This just doesn't have that in terms of the minute-to-minute gameplay. The other thing that's very interesting is that, again, clearly they spent a whole bunch of money on animations and intros and things, and I'll try to put one up on screen here, but basically it makes you play the game less while you stare at animations that you don't care about. For instance, you search for a game, you might be a couple of minutes because there's hardly anybody fucking playing it, and then you see like a spaceship come down to the planet from like 3 different angles, and then everybody else is watching this too. Then you pick your character, and then there's like a little start timer. You get into the game might be over in 3, 4, 5 minutes, but then you watch an intro for 1 minute, and then at the end there's a bunch of credits that pop up and stuff like, oh, you got experience here. I'm holding the button to skip and it won't let me, and then I've watched like 30, 45, 60 seconds of my experience going up, and I've spent like half the time I was on the game not playing the game. Even more so if you get into like a long queue or whatever, which is going to be more and more prevalent. Having that stuff built in, like the animation at the beginning, like it looks cool and you see it once and you're like, oh yeah, that's great, but then you're seeing it over and over again, and it just seems, maybe you can turn it off, but obviously if everybody's seen that, I assume that's like some kind of loading screen. But then when you play other games that have been made recently, the loading screen's like 5-10 seconds, you're in the game. Maybe you're waiting for somebody to connect, but you're not staring at this thing that just seems like it's on a fixed timer, or maybe it's even repeating if people are loading. It just doesn't feel great. It actually feels really bad. So obviously we can move on from the gameplay here, because honestly, if this game came out and had no problems, there was no like murderversity, woke, anti-woke shit, there was no box price on it, this game would still be in a pretty dire situation, because it just doesn't stand on its own 2 feet as a game. I wish it would have done, because it would have then been a really interesting conversation about, how a box price can impact something like this, where it would have like a road to recovery and things like that. But it just seems like pretty much everything they've really focused on for that time, making like great animations, great looking characters, they seem derivative of like Guardians of the Galaxy. Like it legit just feels like you're watching a fan-made knockoff of Guardians of the Galaxy at the beginning, and it does feel like the characters are like aware of that or something. It feels kind of in your face, and that's obviously where the money and effort and things like that have gone. So then we move on to Free Gunner, who has now protected their tweets, obviously. Gameplay animator, anim_Xander. Obviously direct no hate towards these people, because I'm sure they're getting a lot already. We're just going to criticize what's been said, because that's important. But at the same time, we obviously don't need to go and hate on these people, because it is what it is. That reflects poorly on us, and we don't have to do that. So it's Concord release day. So insanely proud of the team and what they and we have accomplished. A labor of love like nothing else. Been playing it so much since early access started a few days ago, and I'm so excited for it to be available to everyone. Not everyone really, just a few hundred people. I'm so honored to have had this be my first AAA game. It was a huge learning experience, lots of struggles, but I'm glad to have gone through them. Time to go play. And I mean, the animations in this game are great. Like I said, it's one of the strong points of the game, one of the few strong points of the game. Everything else is just very forgettable or not very good. So this tweet on its own would have been fine. Like, yeah, I worked on the game and I'm very excited for people to play it because I'm proud of it. And that's good, right? Everyone should be proud of the work, especially because the work is good. This game, everyone working on the game could be great at their job and put blood, sweat and tears in, but the game was sort of a failed premise to begin with, because they've been given an almost impossible task: live up to hundreds of millions of dollars and 8 years of development for a hero shooter. The genre, unless you're doing something incredibly new or doing what everyone else is doing but way better, you're not going to capture a market. You're not going to capture an audience. You're innovating in precisely 0 ways. Your gameplay is derivative. Your character designs are derivative. It was never going anywhere, unfortunately, because obviously there has been time and effort and love put into this game. But yeah, you can be proud of what you did, and you should be. But then that doesn't give you the right to do this. So if somebody says, I'm sorry, this has to be your first. I do not believe it is you or any of the other devs' fault that this game has performed so poorly. I can tell that a lot of effort was put into completing this game. It just came out at the wrong time and genre. Yeah, not wrong. Maybe at a different time, but obviously, if this would have been 6 years ago, you'd have probably done more success at the time. You're way late to the party here. And they respond with, I don't really care. You should. It was a huge labour from a lot of insanely talented people making an awesome game. I mean, the market decides if it's an awesome game, not you. Why would I care about a bunch of talentless freaks hating on it? I'm sure having fun playing it, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. So you're fine with the game that you are essentially preaching to people on your social media about. You're fine with it doing really bad. You're okay with that. You wouldn't change anything. And then also calling people who hate on the game talentless freaks. It's just unnecessary. I don't know why you had to do this. Obviously, if this is your first game, I'm not going to wish you lose your job. I'm not going to wish you don't get opportunities going forward. Maybe you're very, very talented at what you do, but you need to turn off social media because you clearly can't handle social media. If this is how you react to people talking shit about a product that you made publicly for that public audience, social media is not for you. You obviously can't take criticism, whether valid or invalid. You obviously can't take hate, people shouting about shit on social media. And if that's the case, you'd be better off not doing it because social media is not for everybody. Not everybody can handle it. I can understand if you put a bunch of time and effort into things and then it feels like people are trashing it for reasons that are tertiary or even irrelevant or made up, like this whole, woke crusade, anti-woke crusade thing that I sincerely think makes almost no difference in video games and is just a way for people to grift money and get outraged about things that really impact them in precisely zero ways. Because realistically, again, good games are good, bad games are bad, and anything else doesn't really matter. You can tell great stories with a diverse range of cast, and that's just how it's always been. And now every day you see something pop up and it's like, oh, it has a gay person in it, it's woke, it can't be good. And that's just not how things work, fortunately. So obviously going forward, saying things like this, they then went on and privated their Twitter, and I don't believe continued posting. Oh, actually, no. They did continue posting after this. They repeatedly just hid people's posts and then said, pay me $8 to unhide your tweet and unhide your reply to people. And this was getting likes by people, apparently, because that's a reasonable thing for people to do. Obviously unreasonable. Glad that more of the devs are not doing this, but this is not uncommon. Now, obviously, IGN posted a video review, and they said, this is the tagline, Concord isn't the most innovative or content-heavy hero shooter you could play, but with such fantastic competitive gameplay, 16 compelling characters to master, and 12 well-designed maps, it's got the makings of something that could go the distance. I'm just going to say that this is cap. This is not true. This game definitely doesn't have almost any innovative gameplay. It definitely doesn't have a heavy amount of content, so you're right on that. And it's not a fantastic competitive game. Like, it just isn't. It's imbalanced. The maps are not good. I don't know why it says the maps are good. The characters are not compelling in any way whatsoever, in my view. There's basically nothing to them. That they all feel. Some of them have absolutely awful toolkits, awful weapons. They just feel like useless to play, basically. And it doesn't have the makings of something that could go the distance. I'd be very surprised, if this game goes anywhere from here. I'd be very surprised if Sony doesn't pull the plug and just cut investment and just move on, because I don't think throwing good money after bad on this project will change anything. If you felt that this was the launch, you felt like the game was ready now in this state, in this market, for this price, and you felt like focusing on these things that matter not to a competitive audience for a competitive game before having a cast of characters that people care about, you're just not capable, I don't think, of taking this game where it would need to go to recover. And you could throw another $100 million behind this and that still be the case. I don't think there's really any point. Like, it's a shame because, again, this is a lot of money that could have gone towards a better game that hit the audience and the market that they wanted to. But I don't think this game's going anywhere at this point. If it goes free to play and they put some work into it, maybe, it could see some type of audience, but you'd essentially be trying to claw back, hundreds of millions of dollars from an almost non-existent starting position. And I don't think that's worth the risk. I don't think Sony will continue to put money into this game. It just doesn't make sense to. It's failed in such a colossal, spectacular fashion that I just can't imagine that being the case. So obviously going through some of the comments, there's the usual type of delusional stuff. IGN must be getting paid big for this. No, that would have come out years ago. What typically happens is these game reviewers don't play games in the same way you do. They also don't review games in the way that you would want them to, because you're a hardcore, you're engaging on social media, and therefore you're already not their target audience in most cases. They're reviewing the game like it probably is a 7 out of 10 in terms of like the actual game, ignoring everything else, like the minute-to-minute gameplay. Like a 7 out of 10 is probably reasonable for it. But when it's competition are like 8 out of 10s and already have the market share in the audience and don't have a box price, these things matter. And basically a 7 out of 10 is just like a mediocre, like, yeah, it's all right. That's kind of what we've decided. A 6 would be a slap in the face. A 7 is just like, okay. An 8 is like where you'd probably want most games to be. It's just kind of how review scores work. You don't really see these big companies give super low scores almost ever. And this game is polished to a degree that I don't think 7's really unreasonable. It's just obviously a 7 in this genre. If you were scaling it on, versus the other games, it would be like a 3. But in the overall sense of like a video game, a 7's probably okay. The thing is that the way, payment occurs in situations like this is just like exposure, basically. It's like the meme about influencers, like, oh, let me do this and I'll pay you an exposure. Only these companies are like Sony, right? So they're not going to come out and say, this is a 1 out of 10 dog shit, terrible, terrible game, because A, it's not. And B, they'd probably just not get exclusives anymore from Sony. They'd probably not get review keys and stuff. They'd probably just kind of get like left out in the cold. That's how like payment works. It's that you don't want to like massively annoy people, but I don't think that's even happened here. Like, I don't think they've specifically given this a 7, which is again just a mediocre, like, oh, the game's not a total piece of shit score. I don't think that's happened, but if it was, that's what it'd be. It's not like they're sliding dollar bills under the reviewer's door or anything. That would have come out a long time ago. And anytime something like this does, it's always the same thing like I've just described. Oh, they don't want to give, big publisher bad review scores and really go in on them, because then they'll just give the exclusive to another journalistic outlet. And then that outlet will get the views and the clicks that you would have gotten. And then if you do that for a couple of different things, your company dies. You just can't keep the door open. You can't pay people. Wow, IGN really did be giving out 7s all the time, lol. Yeah. How'd this get a 7? The same as Outlaws. Must be 1 point for every person still playing it. Got him. I only play innovative and content-heavy hero shooters. There you go. Adam, I thought his name said Cringler there. Dead game. Just make fun of it. I mean, that's what YouTubers are for, right? Compelling characters. Bitch, stop lying with your dollar store guns to the galaxy shit. Ain't nothing compelling about them. I agree with that. Yeah. I wouldn't really put it that way, but it is true. They gave a Days Gone a low rating, 6.5 than this. Yeah, I mean, that's not a good look, but different reviewers give games different review scores, and I think most people would retroactively disagree with the 6.5 on Days Gone. Maybe even the reviewer would, or maybe they didn't play it all too much or just didn't like that genre. It's just kind of how reviews go. They are inherently subjective. There are more likes and comments on this tweet than players on PC. God, that fucking sucks. So I think we've probably said enough on this. That's Concord. It's just not a good game, is it? It's not what anyone would really describe as being a good game. I'm sure some people are going to like it, because they always do, and they'll think everyone else is wrong and they've not given the game a chance. I would have loved to have had the narrative of like, oh, everyone else is wrong and this game's actually good. You've just got to give it a chance. But it's just not. Remove everything else from the conversation. look at this game in isolation, it just doesn't work. It's just not a good game, and that's just where it is and where it will probably always be before Sony pulls the plug inevitably. So there we go. Thanks for watching as always. Hopefully you enjoyed. Go buy some gamer subs. There's a link in the video description. You'll get a discount. I'll get some of the money you spend as like a kickback. So you save money, I earn money, all good. It's basically powder. You put it in water, you drink it, and they sell shaker cups, things like that, all waifus and things. It's great. And check out my other social media and content, things like that. So I'll see you next time. Peace.